So have finally finished the quilting part of this, and I've got to get it off of the loom. Before I do that, I'm going to show you guys here how many stitches. So if I come up here and we'll touch, oh, wrong one. I always touch the wrong one. So if we go to that, it has taken me 19 hours, 369,793 stitches to finish the quilting on this bad boy. And just showing you a little bit of it with the light on it. So I'm going to now unroll this thing off of the Longarm machine, and we'll get to cutting the edges. So we'll cut to that, and here we go. Okay, everybody, so now what we're doing here is turning off the Longarm machine, moving it over so that I can then access the entire loom and everything that goes with the quilt. Originally, my thought had been to roll this up and to cut the quilt, the batting excess on either side and the backing excess on either side with it attached to the loom. But in the end, that seemed like that was going to end up being more cumbersome than it was going to be helpful. So what I went ahead and did is just worked on taking it off. So a couple things that you need for this that I would recommend. One is you need whatever you store your pins in. If you attach your quilt with pins, then you're going to need whatever you store your pins in to grab that. I also recommend having your little scissors available as well, so that as you go through, you're going to find strings that you thought you had cut and you didn't cut. So going ahead and having those scissors available to be able to cut them, and then also a lint roller, so that as you go through all of this, you can try and get as much lint as possible off. Obviously, it's ideal if the next step of this is putting it not on your carpet or hardwood floor where you're quilting, because obviously it's going to likely pick up more of that lint and everything. But doing the best that you can, at least to minimize it and get it out of there. So also a good habit is not to then throw any lint on the floor, because obviously you're just going to track it somewhere else eventually. So the way that I go about this too is, after removing all the lint and making sure that I've cut all of the strings or tie-off places that I had, I go through and remove those pins, removing them in from the center outward on either side. Once that's done, then I can start pulling that quilt over the railing and working on cleaning off the fabric at that point with my lint roller and scissors. And also don't forget to check the bottom side some as well, but at this point I'm predominantly looking at the top of it, also checking to make sure that there weren't any issues as well, which I typically do throughout the entire quilting process, but this is kind of the last chance where it's still on the loom. So if there's a problem, I want to find it now, because I could potentially fix it without having to go through and really reattach this completely. So once I've got the front of the quilt detached from the leader cloth and cleaned up, I'm going to move to the back of the quilt here. And this is where we're going to repeat exactly the same process. Now, I did start pulling the pins from the back with the cloth down like this. I was able to see them. Probably would have been easier, as I do during this clip, to do what I did whenever I actually attached the quilt to the frame, which is to actually pull that front part of the frame and the leader cloth up and over the quilt, so that I had more access to exactly where the pins were, and it would have been a lot easier to see that rather than trying to pull them from the back. Once I have the quilt completely off the leader cloth, I do like to go through and clean up my leader cloths, making sure that I wrap them up, get any strings off of them, and make sure that they're clean and ready to go for the next time. Now I have got the quilt completely off of the quilting frame, and I'm just going to go through here and cut the excess off of the quilt. So I'm going to cut the quilt through here with scissors, and I'm going to make sure that I try and keep a fairly straight line. I am going to go back over this with binding, and so I'm keeping a little bit of a ledge with that binding fabric and the backing fabric to just give a little bit of a buffer of whenever I flip that seam edge over, I have that against it. Now, some people would sit here and they would also square up their quilt. Whenever I laid my quilt out, I felt that it laid flat enough that it didn't seem like it was, angled or wonky or overly wrinkled to where I was worried that the quilt was not in a square. Although this is for a family member, so I'm not going for perfection here. I'm more going for just getting the quilt done and having the quilt look nice enough that they're going to enjoy it every Christmas whenever they pull this quilt out. So I'm going to go ahead and finish up this quilt, cutting it, and then the next video will be about binding the quilt. And if you guys have any questions, please let me know. Otherwise, I hope you enjoy the video.